They benched me for 2 years, humiliated my father at the gate and laughed in his face, all because we were black. I didn't quit. I trained like a man with everything to prove. Then the championship final came. Our starter broke his leg, and for the first time in 2 seasons, Coach Holloway had no choice but to point at me.
Marcus, go out there and show them.
I walked onto that field and destroyed the kid everyone called Ronaldo, then stood on that stage and made sure the whole world knew the truth.
It's about everything my family endured to get here. We finally stand here, victorious.
My name is Marcus Jerome Williams, and for 3 years, I wore the number 23 jersey of the Eastbrook United FC. Not because they wanted me to, but because the rule book said they had to carry a full roster. Let me tell you what it feels like to be the best player on a team that refuses to see you. Before I tell you about the championship, before I tell you about the goals, before I tell you about the day I stood on that stage and said everything I had swallowed for years, I need to tell you about my father. His name is Harold Williams. Harold Harry Williams. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders that looked like they were carved out of something permanent, hands so calloused from years of work that when he held yours, it felt like being held by the earth itself. He was a quiet man. Not the kind of quiet that comes from having nothing to say, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing that in certain rooms, certain zip codes, certain circles, your voice was never going to be the loudest one, so you saved it for the moments that counted. He was black, we both were, and in the predominantly white suburb of Eastbrook, New Jersey, that fact followed us like a shadow with its own agenda. My father loved football, not the way some men love it, casually, seasonally, over beer and chicken wings on a Sunday afternoon. He loved it the way a man loves the thing that saved him. He had been a decent player in his own youth, good enough to get noticed, not connected enough to get far. The system had closed its doors on him before he could even find the right hallway. But he had taken everything he learned, everything he felt, everything he dreamed in those fields as a young man, and he had deposited it all into me. From the time I was 4 years old, we were out in the backyard every evening after dinner. Rain, snow, summer heat that made the asphalt shimmer. It didn't matter. My father would set up cones with whatever he had available. Old bottles, stacked bricks, empty paint cans. He taught me footwork before I could multiply. He taught me body positioning before I understood what geometry was. He would watch videos on his old laptop of the greatest players in the world, and then he would pause it, look at me with those serious eyes of his and say, "Marcus, watch what he does with his hips before the defender commits. You see that? That's not speed. That's thinking." He coached me through the fundamentals. He coached me through technique. He coached me through the mental side of the game, how to read a defense, how to anticipate 2 passes ahead, how to stay calm when the pressure came, because the pressure always came. And the ones who fell apart under it were the ones who had never practiced staying whole. By the time I was 13, I was playing against 16-year-olds and leaving them confused. By 15, coaches from 3 counties over were coming to watch me in weekend pickup games. By 17, I had footwork that made people stop walking and just stare. I had vision on the field that bordered on something supernatural. I could control a ball with the outside of my left foot in ways that drew genuine gasps from strangers. I wasn't being arrogant when I knew I was exceptional. My father had spent 13 years building something exceptional. He knew it. I knew it. And on some level, deep beneath all the politics and the pettiness and the prejudice, the people at Eastbrook United FC knew it too. That's what made what they did so calculated. They didn't ignore me because they thought I was bad. They ignored me because they knew I was good, and they didn't want to be the ones to have to admit it. I joined Eastbrook United FC's competitive division at 17 after their scout. A thin, nervous man named Gerald watched me at a regional showcase, and practically tripped over himself getting to my father to offer a spot on the roster. I remember my father shaking the man's hand with that quiet dignity of his. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what we worked for. I should have paid more attention to the look on Gerald's face when he saw the neighborhood we lived in. I should have noticed how his handshake went slightly limp. I should have cataloged the way his eyes did a quick, almost involuntary scan of my father, the dark skin, the worn jacket, the old car parked at the curb, and then how something behind those eyes shifted. I was too excited to notice. My father probably noticed everything. Coach Raymond Holloway was 53 years old, former Division II player, tan and square-jawed, with the particular brand of confidence that belongs to men who have never been seriously challenged. He ran Eastbrook United the way he had apparently run everything in his life, according to his own private logic, with a comfortable blindness to anything that didn't fit the picture he'd already decided on. From day one, I was the extra, the substitute, the piece of the roster that technically existed but was never meant to be used. I showed up to every practice and outperformed every starter. I will not be modest about this because modesty would be dishonest, and this story deserves honesty. In training drills, I was consistently faster, more accurate, and more creative than anyone on that team. I completed passes others missed. I scored in scrimmages with a frequency that should have been impossible to ignore. Holloway ignored it. He had a system, he told me during the one conversation we had in my first month. He had players who understood that system. He didn't need disruption. He needed players who could execute what he asked when he asked it. "You've got raw talent, Marcus," he told me, in that rehearsed tone of someone delivering a compliment designed to keep you quiet. But raw talent without discipline is noise. I wanted to ask him when he had watched me long enough to determine I lacked discipline. I didn't. I was 17, and I still believed that if I kept my head down and kept performing, the numbers would eventually become impossible to deny. They always say that. Let your work speak for itself. What they don't tell you is that some rooms have decided not to listen, and no amount of volume changes that. So I sat on the bench, match after match, week after week. I watched players with a fraction of my ability take the field, make mistakes I would never have made, and receive coaching adjustments and second chances as a matter of routine. I watched the team lose games they should have won. I watched coaches across the field glance at our bench, see me sitting there in full kit, and I could see the confusion on their faces, the silent question of why is that kid not playing. I had no answer for them. I barely had one for myself. But I kept training. I trained harder than anyone on that roster because my father had built something in me that was bigger than Coach Holloway's opinion. Every morning at 5:30, I was out in the backyard. Every evening after practice, I stayed an extra 40 minutes working on whatever I had noticed was missing from my game. I studied footage. I studied the players my father had shown me since childhood. I studied Ronaldo, not just the goals, but the work, the relentless, almost inhuman commitment to refinement. And I used him as my private benchmark. If I couldn't be better than the best in the world, I would at least close the gap until the gap embarrassed itself. In my second season with Eastbrook United, my father started coming to home matches. He would arrive early, find a spot along the fence away from the main crowd, and stand there in his old jacket with a thermos of coffee, watching. He never cheered loudly. He never made a scene. He just watched, with those careful eyes that had been studying this game and studying me for as long as either of us could remember. I think seeing him there was the only thing that kept me from quitting. And I think that's exactly why they targeted him. It started small, the kind of small that is designed to seem accidental. One of the assistant coaches, a younger man named Brett, who had the personality of someone auditioning to be a villain in a coming-of-age film, made a comment within earshot of my father about the open bench area being reserved for team affiliates. My father showed his family pass. Brett looked at it like it was written in a foreign language, shrugged, and walked away. Then it escalated. There was an afternoon. I remember it was a Tuesday, overcast, the field slightly damp from a morning drizzle, when my father arrived during a light training session to drop off a bag I'd forgotten at home. Holloway intercepted him at the gate. I was on the far end of the field, but I saw it. I saw my father's posture, upright still, that quiet dignity, and I saw Holloway's body language, which was the body language of a man who has decided something and is now performing the decision. Two other senior players drifted over, then Brett, then Gerald, the scout who had first recruited me. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw my father's face. I knew that face. That was the face he made when something was happening that he had expected and dreaded, and was now experiencing with the weary precision of confirmation. Later, my father told me what they'd said. Holloway had told him, plainly and with the smoothness of someone who had rehearsed it, that Marcus's position on the team was under review, that there were concerns about fit, that if things continued the way they were going, it might be better for everyone if Marcus found a program that was a stronger match for his profile. My father had asked what specifically was concerning. Holloway had been vague: attitude, team integration, the kind of intangibles that are hard to quantify, the vocabulary of discrimination that has learned to wear business casual. Then Brett had stepped in with a smile and said that if my father was interested in Marcus staying on the roster, there were ways to contribute to the program. He said this while looking at my father in a way that communicated volumes about what kind of contribution he had in mind. The kind that starts with a man being reminded of his place and ends with him doing whatever is asked to keep his child safe. They wanted my father to do groundskeeping work, unpaid. They framed it as volunteer support from invested families, but every family they had ever asked was someone who could not easily say no. My father knew what it was. He had lived long enough to recognize the architecture of that particular trap. They told him if Marcus didn't stay in his lane, didn't accept being a bench player without complaint, didn't make things difficult, he would be cut from the roster entirely, in front of other parents, publicly, in a way that would follow his record. And then Gerald laughed. He actually laughed at something Brett said that I will not repeat here, something about the two of them, something built from the specific ugliness that surfaces when small men feel safe in groups. My father drove home that day, and something in him changed. I didn't notice it immediately. It happened the way a slow thing happens, gradually and then all at once. He stopped coming to the fence. He started coming home later from work, spending evenings in his chair by the window, quiet in a different way than his usual quiet. He started coughing in November, and by December the cough had a weight to it. By January, our family doctor was using words that had gravity. Stress, hypertension, the body keeping score. My father, who had spent 13 years building me, who had given every evening and every weekend and every ounce of football knowledge he possessed to prepare me for exactly this kind of stage, my father stopped leaving the house. Because of them. Because of what they said to him on a damp Tuesday afternoon at a gate he had every right to walk through. I am going to say the next part carefully because I want it understood completely. I did not quit. I will explain why I did not quit in a moment. But there was a night in January, sitting in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, listening to my father cough from down the hallway, where I held the choice in both hands like something broken and examined it from every angle. I didn't quit because my father had not built me to be the kind of person who let Harold Williams's 13 years become nothing. I didn't quit because somewhere in me, in a place that is harder than anger and quieter than pride, I knew that the only answer to what they had done was not absence. It was presence. Undeniable, record-breaking, impossible to footnote presence. I was going to make them watch. I trained like a man with something to prove, which is the most dangerous kind of athlete there is. My father knew I was still on the team. He didn't ask many questions that year. I think he understood something I hadn't fully articulated yet, that I was doing this for him as much as for myself, and that asking me to stop would be asking me to accept the ending they had written. And Harold Williams had never been able to stomach other people's endings. I worked on everything. I worked on things that had no immediate application just because I wanted no weakness left anywhere in my game. I watched footage of Ronaldo for hours, not to copy him, but to understand the logic of a player who had decided that ordinary limits were optional. I studied his positioning before the ball arrived, his acceleration in the first 3 steps, the way he manufactured space from nothing, the weight he gave to practice that most people reserved only for performance. I made myself into something that would be difficult to explain away. My numbers in training were outrageous. Even the players who didn't like me, and there were several partly from Holloway's influence, partly from the ordinary resentments that accumulate when someone near you is better than you and makes you aware of it every day. Even they would occasionally lose the script and just watch me do something with a ball and forget to look away. Holloway kept me on the bench. He had made a decision, and Holloway was the kind of man whose identity was attached to his decisions. To put me in the game was to admit he had been wrong, and that cost more than any losing streak. We lost 4 of our first 7 matches that season. Our striker was inconsistent. Our midfield had gaps you could park a car in. 3 times in those 7 games, I watched us concede goals that I knew, with the cold certainty of someone who had studied those exact situations 1,000 times, I would not have conceded. But I sat. I stretched on the touchline. I warmed up when told, and I sat. The regional championship came in late spring. Eastbrook United had somehow scraped through the bracket, partly luck, partly a favorable draw, partly one genuinely inspired performance in the quarterfinal where our goalkeeper had the game of his life. The final was against Riverside FC, and Riverside FC had Ronaldo. Not the Ronaldo, I want to be precise here, but a 17-year-old who had been given that name by every scout in the tri-state area. A player named Cristiano Vasquez who played with a hunger and a technical quality that was, by any honest measure, extraordinary. He was being scouted by academies in Europe. He had been on the back page of 2 regional sports publications that year. Playing against him was considered, by most coaches, a matter of damage limitation. He was the best young player I had ever seen. I had studied him for weeks. The day of the regional championship was one of those late May afternoons that can't decide what season it belongs to, bright and warm in the sun, sharp-edged in the shade, the kind of day that feels significant before anything has happened. My father didn't come. I hadn't told him it was the final. I didn't want him anywhere near Holloway or Brett or any of them. I wanted him safe at home, in his chair by the window, and I wanted to bring him something that evening that would require no explanation. I warmed up with the substitutes. I did my full routine, the footwork sequences my father had taught me, the ball mastery drills, the explosive change of direction work. I did it all with the same intensity I brought every morning at 5:30, because I had learned a long time ago not to save anything for when it was asked of you. You had to be ready before the asking. Riverside FC came out like they had already won. Vasquez was everywhere in the first 20 minutes, in pockets of space that shouldn't have existed, combining in triangles with his midfielders, already making our right back look like he was moving through water. He scored in the 23rd minute with a finish that I have to honestly describe as beautiful. A first-time shot with the inside of his right foot that went precisely where the goalkeeper wasn't, and he knew it was going there before he hit it. Then in the 38th minute, our right midfielder Danny Horowitz, starter, Holloway's favorite, went into a challenge awkwardly and came out of it grabbing his leg. I knew before the medical team reached him. The angle was wrong. The sound was wrong. The way he was holding himself was wrong. The physio came on. The team doctor came on. And then there was that particular silence that falls over a field when a crowd understands that something genuine has happened, something that can't be undone by a substitution board or a halftime talk. Danny Horowitz had a fractured fibula. His season was over in 38 minutes. Holloway stood at the touchline with his arms folded. I watched him from the bench. I watched him scan his available options, 3 substitutes, 2 of whom had already been flagged that week with minor knocks. I watched him do the arithmetic. I watched him arrive at the only conclusion the mathematics allowed. He looked at me for a long moment, the look of a man who has built a wall and is now being asked to walk through it. Then he pointed at me and said, "Williams, you're in." I will not pretend I wasn't nervous. I was. Not the kind of nervous that freezes you, the kind of nervous that means everything is alive and nothing is numb, which is the only useful kind. I walked onto that field and I felt the ground under my boots the way you feel something you have been preparing for your entire life. The first 10 minutes I watched. I played conservatively, positioned correctly, won my headers, completed my passes. I was learning the pace of the game, recalibrating everything I had studied in footage to the live reality in front of me. Vasquez glanced at me twice in that first 10 minutes, the kind of professional glance that says, "I see you, I'm filing you." Then in the 53rd minute, a long ball came over the top, and I took it on my chest, turned past my marker in a single movement, and played a through ball that split their entire backline for our striker. He didn't finish, he never finished. It was his defining trait, but something shifted on that field. I felt it. The Riverside players felt it. Even the people on the touchline felt it. Vasquez looked at me differently after that. In the 61st minute, I scored my first goal. It wasn't a spectacular goal. It was a smart goal, a near-post run timed to the inside of a second I had been calculating since I noticed their left back always shifted 2 steps too late. I got there before him, I made contact before he adjusted, and the ball went in at the near post with enough conviction that the goalkeeper was still moving the wrong way when it crossed the line. 1-1. The stadium, if you can call a regional championship venue a stadium, came alive in a way that made my skin respond. In the 69th minute, I scored again. This one I will describe because it deserves description. We won the ball back in our own half, and I saw the space behind Riverside's left center back before he turned to track back. I called for the ball, received it on the half turn, and I ran. I ran the way I had run in the backyard at 5:30 every morning for 3 years. I ran the way my father had taught me to run, not just with my legs, but with my whole body organized toward the destination. Their right back came to close me. I dropped my shoulder, went outside, came back inside in a movement that left him genuinely stationary, and I finished with the outside of my right foot into the far bottom corner. I have scored better goals since. I have never scored a more necessary one. 2-1. In the 74th minute, Vasquez equalized. I will give him everything he deserved. It was an extraordinary individual goal, and I stood in my position and watched him celebrate and thought, this is the level. This is exactly the level I've been preparing for. 2-2. The last 16 minutes of that game were the most intense athletic experience of my life to that point. Both teams understood that the next goal was the final goal. The game had opened up in the way games open, when exhaustion and desperation remove all caution. There were chances at both ends. Our goalkeeper made 2 saves that I still see when I close my eyes. In the 88th minute, I received the ball 30 yards from goal in a position that, objectively, should have led to nothing. I had 2 defenders in front of me and an angle that made shooting almost illogical. But I had spent months studying a man named Cristiano Ronaldo who had decided that ordinary limits were optional, and something in my body remembered every one of those sessions. I cut left. The first defender followed. I cut right. The second defender followed. I created a half-yard of space that was barely space at all, and I shot. I hit it clean. I hit it with everything I had accumulated in those years: the backyard, the cones, the early mornings. The bench the Tuesday afternoon, at the gate my father in his chair. By the window the cough from down the hallway. All of it, I hit it, and it went in off the underside of the crossbar so cleanly that for a full 2 seconds the crowd didn't respond because they were processing whether it had actually happened. 3-2. Final whistle. I stood in the middle of that field, and I did not perform joy. I felt something deeper than joy, the specific relief of a thing coming true that you protected against all the evidence that it wouldn't. The awards ceremony was held 2 weeks later at the Regional Sports Authority Banquet Hall, a proper stage, proper lighting, folding chairs in rows, plaques and trophies on a draped table. I had made one phone call the night before. My father answered on the second ring, and I told him what I had done. I told him about the goals. I told him about the final. I told him there was an awards ceremony tomorrow and that I needed him to be there, in the front row, because what I was going to say on that stage required a witness. There was a silence on the phone. Then my father said, in that quiet way of his, "I'll be there." And he was. He came in his best jacket, the one he kept for occasions. He sat in the front row with his thermos of coffee and his hands folded in his lap, and when I walked into that room and saw him sitting there, I had to look at the ceiling for a moment to compose myself. The ceremony proceeded. Various awards were given. Best goalkeeper, best defensive performance, young player of various categories. Then the moment came. I received the MVP award for the championship, the regional's highest individual honor. I received a separate commendation from the State Athletic Commission for the most goals scored by a substitute in a regional final in 12 years. I received a scouting invitation letter from 2 European Academy programs that had sent representatives to the final. And then I was given the microphone. Holloway was in the third row. Brett was next to him. Gerald was somewhere near the back. My teammates were arranged across 2 rows, some of them, to their credit, actually looking at me with something like belated recognition. I held the microphone and I looked at my father first. He nodded once. That was enough. I said what I had been composing in my head for 3 years. I spoke about my father. I spoke about what he had built, the mornings, the cones, the videos on the old laptop, the hours, the years of quiet investment in something he believed in. I spoke about him with the precision and the love of someone who understood exactly what was standing behind them. And then I spoke about what had happened at that gate on a damp Tuesday afternoon. I did not use coded language. I did not soften it into something comfortable. I told the room, the cameras, the officials, the scouts, the parents, what Coach Raymond Holloway and his staff had said to my father. I told them about the work they'd tried to coerce him into. I told them about the laughter. I told them what that had done to a man who had done nothing except love his son and show up to watch him play. I watched Holloway's face as I spoke. I watched him decide whether to object and then decide not to. I watched the room shift in the way rooms shift when something true is being said in a space that had been comfortable with untruth. I told them that my father had gotten sick. That stress had made him sick. That the specific, targeted cruelty of small men with temporary power had reached all the way into our house and taken something from a man who had given everything. And then I looked directly at Holloway and I said, "You had the best player in this region sitting on your bench for 2 seasons because you couldn't see past what he looked like. And I need you to understand, and everyone in this room needs to understand, that is not a talent evaluation. That is a failure of character, and the record will show it." I called my father up to the stage. He stood up slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked to that stage with the same dignity he had carried to the gate on that Tuesday afternoon. He stood next to me under those lights, and I put the MVP plaque in his hands because it was his. He had made it. Every touch, every goal, every moment of composure on that field had been assembled from what he gave me in a backyard with paint can cones and a second-hand laptop. My father held that plaque and he looked out at the room, and he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. I am 21 now and I play professionally. I will not tell you for which club yet. There's a contract being finalized and lawyers who prefer I stay quiet until the ink is dry. What I will tell you is that the European scouting invitation became a trial, the trial became an offer, and the offer became real. My father comes to every home match, not from behind a fence. He sits in the family section, in a proper seat with his name on the reservation, and he brings his thermos of coffee because some habits are not meant to change. His health has improved. Not completely. The body remembers what it went through, but substantially. He is back to going outside. He is back to watching football in the evenings. He is back to pausing the screen and saying things like, "Watch what he does with his hips before the defender commits." Coach Raymond Holloway resigned from Eastbrook United 6 weeks after that ceremony. I have heard various accounts of the circumstances. I have not lost sleep over any of them. What I think about, when I think about all of it, the bench, the gate, the final, the stage, is something my father said to me years ago, on an ordinary evening in the backyard, when I was frustrated about something small and temporary. He stopped what he was doing, looked at me and said, "Marcus, the game is longer than the moment you're in, always." He was talking about football. He was talking about everything. I was the only black player on my team. I was the best player on my team. For 2 years they made me invisible, and when they couldn't anymore, I made them watch. And when I stood on that stage, with my father next to me under those lights, I understood something that I will carry for the rest of my life. There is no dignity in a plaque. There is no justice in an award. The only thing that lasts, the only thing that actually means anything, is what Harold Williams taught me in a backyard with paint can cones. Do the work. Stay whole. Outlast them. The rest is just scoreboard.